So now let's add the ability for the player to actually equip the item that it picks up. Let's go into our scripts behavior folder and create a new C# script for the equip behavior. We'll open it up in MonoDevelop, and once inside, we're going to need to keep track of a few properties. The most important is going to be the actual item that's equipped. In this case, we'll just use an ID. Before we add that, make sure that we extend our abstract behavior. And now, let's create two private properties. The first will be an int, and this is going to be our current item ID. Now, you'll notice I'm using an underscore here, and that's because we're going to use a public getter and setter called current item, and we can't have the two with the same name. This will make a little bit more sense in a second when we actually do it. Next, we'll create a private reference to the animator, since when we equip an item, we're going to want to change the visuals of the player to reflect that the item has been equipped. Now, let's take a look at how to make our public getter and setter for current item. This is going to be an int, and we'll call this current item. First, we'll need a getter, and we'll simply return the value of current item. Next, we'll also need to set the value, and inside of here, we'll use current item equals value. Now, value is automatically passed in to the setter by just creating a getter and setter. So don't need to worry about where this comes from. Whatever we set current item to will resolve to value automatically for us. The next thing that we're going to want to do, though, is we're going to want to tell our animator what item has been equipped. This way, we can make a transition based on the item that's already on the player. Here, we'll create a new property for equipped item, and we'll pass it in the value of the current item. Next, we'll want to override the abstract behavior's awake method so that we're able to get access to the animator. Let's also make sure that we call the base awake so that our behavior works correctly with everything that needs to be set up. And below this, we'll get a reference to the animator. Now, we can also remove the start and update methods since we won't be using them. So let's save this and go back in and make sure that we add it to our player. Let's drag the equipped script over to our player. If we scroll down and look at it, you'll see that in the inspector, current item isn't actually exposed, even though it's public. And that's because the default inspector inside of Unity doesn't expose getters and setters. But that's okay, we won't be actually changing this value by hand. We're going to go back into the Flower script now, and we'll make the changes there. Let's open up the PowerUp Flower script, and here we'll start making some alterations. Now that we're inside of the Power Flower behavior, let's add a property that'll represent the item ID for the flower itself. Here we'll make this a public int and call this item ID and set it to 1. We won't be using the start and update methods, so we can get rid of those, but we will override the onCollected method from the collectible script. Also, we need to pass in a game object. In this case, we'll call it target. And since the parent class doesn't have any logic in it, we don't need to actually call base onCollect. What we will do, though, is test that the target actually has an equip behavior, and then we'll set the current item to our item ID. Here I'm creating a variable for equip behavior, and I'm getting the component equip on it. Now, we want to make sure that this isn't set to null, so we'll do a quick condition to make sure that the actual target contains this script before we try to set the value, which would throw an error. And now we can tell the equip behavior that its current item equals item ID. Now we'll save our script, go back into our game. Let's select the player and look at the animator. What we're going to want to do here is create the variable that'll store the item that's equipped inside of our animator. We'll create a int, and we're going to call this equipped item. Now, if we run our game and get focus back to the animator, we can test this out. One thing we'll need to do is temporarily move the animator to the top so that we can preview the game and also see what's going on inside of the animator. We'll get focus back to game, walk over, and now when we collect our item, you'll see that equipped item has changed to 1. In the next video, we'll start adding new animations to represent what happens when the player actually picks up this item, and we'll change his graphics accordingly.